If you were running a fever today, aspirin would be your first stop, probably. But way back when, your doctor, and I use that term very loosely in this context, might have prescribed willow bark tea if you were lucky, or bloodletting if you were not. And the reason for that is because medical knowledge has been patchy over the centuries. And that can add a fascinating aspect to fantasy worlds. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. Today, we're delving into the awesome and occasionally cringe-inducing world of historical medical practices. These were the precursors to modern medicine, setting the stage for the healing systems we know today, both in reality and in fantasy worlds. Just before we delve into that, this video has been available to members of my channel for some weeks already. So if you like what I do here and you want to have early access to my videos, check out the membership options available. Everybody with a wood and above membership gets to see the videos as soon as I release them, sometimes up to 4 weeks in advance. Okay, enough of that. Let's get cracking with medical knowledge for fantasy worlds. We should first discuss the historical context of our world, and our first stop here is ancient Rome, a civilization that is known for its advanced understanding of engineering, art, and law. But when it comes to medicine, things get a little weird in the Roman world. Take rabies, for instance. This is a deadly disease that is transferred through the bite of an infected animal. The Romans believed that the cure was for the victim to eat raw veal. Why raw veal was considered a cure for rabies is a mystery lost to time. But such is the nature of historical medical practices. They do have really weird beliefs that we don't know the reason for, and figuring out that reason could very well give your world a great fantastical aspect. Moving forward in time to the late 1700s, we encounter the arrival of tobacco on English shores from the Americas. This was not only a significant moment in terms of trade and social customs, but it also impacted medical practices. Believe it or not, there was a time when tobacco smoke administered as an enema was considered a cure-all. This rather odd treatment was thought to help with everything from colds to hernias to hysteria in women. It is a striking example of how cultural beliefs can shape medical practices. There was, as I said, a time when doctors thought tobacco was a cure for female hysteria, which in itself is a pretty weird condition. It seems to have been an amalgamation of every possible mental illness being grouped together as something that women can suffer from. Now, tobacco curing it is something that we see as weird, but it is still a step up from the medieval cures for female hysteria, which involved exorcism, since female hysteria was seen to be demonic possession. So I'll be honest, I would rather smoke tobacco, chew tobacco, or even take it as an enema before I go through a medieval exorcism ceremony. But let's leave that weirdness behind and take a look at the 19th century. There was a widespread belief that extracting a person's teeth could cure mental illness. The theory was that mental illness could be caused by infection in the teeth, probably because they're close to the brain. And there was no nuance to mental illness in this case. You were either normal enough or you were insane. There is absolutely nothing in between. Fun times. Anyway, teeth extraction was seen as a necessary step to healing the mind. While we know better today, it's a great reminder of how limited understanding can lead to really drastic and frankly harmful measures. That same century also saw a surge in the use of leeches as a medical tool. Doctors believed that these tiny creatures could cure ailments ranging from headaches to hemorrhoids. The practice of bloodletting, thought to balance the body's humors, was a staple of medicine for centuries. Generally, losing blood is bad for you, and leeches are not going to make it any better, but a lot of medical professionals were pretty convinced of this treatment, and it was very commonly used. Let's talk about trauma care during this period. A remarkable example of 19th century medicine comes from President Garfield's shooting. So he was a president of the United States that was shot, and he was treated by his doctors in an attempt to save his life. This incident occurred during a time when germ theory of disease was only just gaining acceptance, and Garfield's doctors, unfamiliar with this new understanding of disease, stuck their fingers into the bullet wound unsterilized, and they equally inserted unsterilized instruments in there trying to get the actual bullet out of the wound. This led to a severe infection because, of course, it led to a severe infection, and ultimately Garfield's death. And that would be a very common way to die in a world that doesn't understand germ theory. If people don't know that you need to wash your hands to get rid of germs, and you put unsterilized instruments into a man's wounds, it's not the wound that's going to kill him, it's the infection. Another interesting thing about Garfield's treatment is that he ended up not being able to eat. And because he couldn't eat, they fed him via nutrient enemas. This doesn't actually work. It gives you maybe 10% of the nutrients you need. So, yeah, that poor guy really did not have the best deathbed scene that I've ever heard of. And those medical professionals did that too. So if you enjoyed this overview of historical methods, hit the thumbs up button, and let's talk about spiritual practices like the aforementioned exorcism. Throughout history, many societies have interwoven spiritual practices with their medical ones, creating a holistic approach to healing, as it's sometimes called. These practices can range from prayers to laying on of hands to faith healing to shamanistic practices. They offer a rich tapestry of human belief and tradition and can lend depth to societies we create in our fantasy worlds. In a society where spiritual healing has a direct measurable effect, so it works on a repeated basis, it could hold a prominent role in your healing technologies. Faith healers or shamans may raise to positions of great importance in such a society, and the rituals surrounding healing could become central aspects of that culture. Healers that could cure people with a prayer the way D&D clerics can would result in an awful lot of faithful people. It would probably also catapult priests into leadership positions. I think theocracy would be a pretty common form of government in this kind of society. But what if these practices didn't work, or didn't work reliably, only sometimes work? In that case, faith healers could resort to a range of excuses. They might suggest the patient lacked faith, or was being tested, or was being punished for past sins. This can have a profound effect on people, sometimes leading to a sense of guilt, despair, or even a crisis of faith. A great example of this kind of attitude towards spiritual healing is seen in Raymond E. Feist's novel, The King's Buccaneer. In this book, the main character, Nicky, was born with a club foot, and none of the clerics in this world could heal him. And in this book, that is explored when the magician Pug tells Nicky that he can't be healed because he is holding on to the deformity. He needs to want to be healed in order to be healed. So I'm normally a fan of Raymond E. Feist, but that particular attitude has got some really dark downsides, which, if you're going to have it in your world, I think that you should explore. That kind of attitude creates a sense of blame or responsibility for something that people have no control over, and it can lead to some fundamental stigmatization in society and a really harsh society where people are held responsible for deformities as though they had caused themselves to have deformities. So, if you're going to use such a spiritual aspect in your books, I think that it is something that you should explore in more detail to give that kind of nuanced view of the impact that this viewpoint has on your society. However, the spiritual aspects of healing isn't all doom and gloom and terrible dark societies. Spiritual healing can provide comfort, community, and an avenue for introspection. Take prayer and meditation, for example. These practices can help individuals find peace, acceptance, and inner strength, especially in a society where formal therapy isn't available. Similarly, priests and spiritual leaders listening to the woes and worries of their flock can serve as an early therapist, providing a safe space for individuals to voice their fears and concerns. In the case of psychological trauma, these spiritual practices could offer immense relief by providing a structure to understand and accept the trauma. They could aid in the healing process. Bear in mind that soldiers have been suffering from things like PTSD since long before we named it PTSD, and going to your priest for help could provide you with some aspects of the kind of therapy that kind of trauma requires. So, whether or not these spiritual practices have any physical effect, they undoubtedly influence the psychological and emotional well-being of individuals, shaping their perceptions and their interactions with society and with the spiritual world around them, whether that is a real thing or not. As world builders, it is our job to decide how and to what extent spiritual healing works in fantasy societies. It's a delicate balance as it impacts everything from individual characters to societal structures. But if you put some thought behind the impact that your spiritual and physical healing practices have, it can form a complex, authentic layer in your world building. So I spent a bit of time talking about mental aspects, but that's not the only thing that we misunderstood about the past. So, let's now turn our attention towards what we thought in the past of diseases. Understanding disease was as much a matter of speculation and belief as it was empirical observation. Often, these beliefs hinged on theories that seem pretty bizarre to our modern sensibilities. But understanding these historical theories isn't just educational. It can provide some great fodder for world building in your fantasy setting. So let's take a look at some of these theories of disease that people believed in. First up is the miasma theory. This theory held that diseases were caused by miasmas, essentially bad air, emanating from rotting organic matter. This is why, for centuries, cities with poor sanitation were considered hotbeds for various illnesses. This is a very great example of two corollary facts. Yes, diseases are more common when people are in contact with each other and can spread the disease, and hence more common in cities. And yes, cities with poor sanitation have got bad air that smells bad. The two aren't really linked. It's not that one causes the other, but they are two corollary facts which then got mixed up. It's like the old wives' tale of lightning causing sour milk. No, lightning and sour milk are both side effects of the humidity of a storm coming together and creating the conditions for milk to go sour and for lightning to strike, and hence the old wives' tale of the two in combination. Anyway, back to cities and diseases. What if bad air actually was tied to an elemental magic system? There's some interesting thoughts to explore in this miasma theory if you actually have such a thing that can cause disease in your world, whether natural or magical. Let's move on to humors theory. The ancient Greeks and Romans believed that the human body was filled with 4 fundamental substances or humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Health, they thought, was maintained by keeping these humors in balance. Illness was the result of an imbalance, which could be corrected by methods like bloodletting again, or changing diets or something like that. Now, think of this in a fantasy context. Maybe your world has magical healers who can visually perceive these humors and directly manipulate them to heal. This is a concept that Catherine Kerr explores in her world building in the world of Devery. In the Devery series, the humors are tied to the 5 elements of her world. So earth, fire, air, water, and ether. These elemental associations aren't just symbolic, they directly influence a character's health and well-being. In Kerr's universe, if a person's fire element runs too hot, they might develop a fever. Here, traditional bloodletting doesn't come into play. Instead, it's the job of the Duma masters, healers trained in manipulating these elements, to diagnose and correct the elemental imbalance. By tuning into a person's elemental composition and nudging it back into harmony, they can cure ailments from fevers to more complex diseases. And this brings us to an additional fascinating aspect in Kerr's world. Not only do Duma masters manipulate the elemental balance, but they can also see the corruption around the wound. Basically, they can see the infection around a wound. It is as if they had a sixth sense that allows them to perceive physical harm at a more profound level than just a superficial injury. And this ability adds an extra layer of depth to their role as healers, and it serves as a unique mechanism for combating diseases and infections. So if you have an elemental magic system, I would definitely suggest looking at the humors theory of disease management for healing in your world. I think that tying people's internals to your elemental magic system could really embed the magic system in the world and create a sense of everything ties back to magic. It's not just a normal world with magic pasted on top of it. There were numerous other pre-modern explanations for disease. They were called spiritual afflictions, divine punishment, astrological influence. The presence of certain creatures and plants were all considered possible factors. In your world, think of how such beliefs could add a layer of mystery and superstition to your cultures. Perhaps an innocuous-looking flower could be feared as a harbinger of disease, or maybe a particular celestial event is dreaded as a bringer of plague. And maybe that's just a superstition. Maybe the comet will pass by and there will be no disease. And maybe it's true. And maybe those things do cause disease in some way. So think about where disease in your world comes from, what people believe about that, and importantly, how your magic influences diseases. And speaking of magic, let's explore that concept in a little more depth. What if diseases are not caused by bacteria or by viruses? What if they're not caused by imbalances in humors? What if they're caused by magic itself? Cursed diseases, a staple of many fairy tale stories, are an interesting aspect of magical illnesses. These are ailments inflicted by a dark spell or a vengeful deity. Cures for these could range from complex rituals, divine intervention, or even the seemingly impossible task of appeasing the cursor. These provide a rich tapestry of narrative threads, the afflicted embarking on quests for an elusive cure, or forming unlikely alliances. But let's not stop with curses. Magic, like any powerful tool, can be weaponized. Imagine a fantasy setting where magic is used as a form of biological warfare. A malignant sorcerer could conjure a plague or a hex that weakens the enemy. The tactical implications of such powers in a world at war can be fascinating to explore, weaving a tapestry of political and magical intrigue across your world and providing you with a wealth of thematic elements to draw on. Of course, there is also other aspects, like the concept explored by the fantasy author Tamora Pierce, sympathetic magic. In her worlds, an evil mage named Roger uses a small statue or fetish of the Queen of Tortal to wreak havoc. By making the statue sick, he indirectly afflicts the queen with the same ailment. This plays with the idea that an object tied symbolically or spiritually to a person can affect that person's health. Perhaps in your world, magic users can manipulate similar fetishes, not only to inflict harm, but also to heal. Such magical diseases may require equally unique cures. A great example of this kind of special cure for a special wound comes from the grandfather himself, Tolkien. After Frodo is dealt a magical wound with a Morgul blade, he starts turning into a ringwraith, and only by getting him to Elrond for elven healing can the wound in his spirit be cured. This is because the ringwraith's blade didn't just injure him physically, it also injured his spirit, and elven healing is a form of magic that is deeply spiritual. Magical diseases and magical wounds and their cures can add an extra layer of complexity to healthcare in fantasy world. They can demonstrate the rules of a magic system, they can develop characters, and they can introduce compelling plot devices with a strong line of tension. So don't shy away from giving your characters a magical cough or two. And if you enjoyed this discussion of diseases, magical or otherwise, hit the thumbs up button, and let's talk about the impact of medical practice on society. Medical practices, both historical and magical, shape society. Each culture has its own understanding of health and the body, and these perceptions are heavily influenced by their medical practices and knowledge. In a world where bloodletting is common, people might view the body as a system of balance where disease is an imbalance of some sort. But if magical healing is widely accessible, this could lead to a much different perception of the body, where ailments are seen as temporary hurdles, easily rectified with a touch or an incantation, and plague or disease would never be the feared spectre that it became in our world. Importantly, medical practitioners are people, and as such, they influence the society that they're part of. So, in your world, who are these healers? They could be respected members akin to modern doctors, or perhaps they are spiritual leaders revered for their sacred connection to the health of the people. Maybe they are seen as both spiritual and physical healers. Their status could depend on their ability to heal, their knowledge of magical or medical arts, and the success rate of their treatments. Are these healers of yours organized? Do they have guilds or professional organizations? Perhaps there's an esteemed magical college dedicated to the art of healing. Or perhaps there's a council of elder shamans who oversee the spiritual health practices that are available to the people. Mercedes Lackey explores the concept of a medical collegia in her world of Valdemar. She actually has 3 collegia, the bards, the heralds, and the healers. And it was very interesting to me in her healers collegia that healers are taught both physical means of healing, so with like thread and so on, so that you don't exhaust your magic by curing something you can just cure with your hands, but also that it explores the concept of healers trying to take on too much, ultimately ending up in a situation where they themselves have to be healed. So it explores that concept of if you don't look after yourself, you end up in a situation where the healer needs healing. And of course, speaking of mundane methods of healing, like putting stitches in wounds and so on, your healers will need tools. What do these tools look like? And here we've got a really great space to explore the meeting point of magic and medicine. The herbs the healers gather could be imbued with magical properties, or maybe they need special magical tools to gather those herbs, or their surgical tools could be enchanted to make cleaner cuts or minimize pain. Maybe they use precious stones with specific magical properties or rare artifacts that can cure certain ailments. Consider the magical creation or enhancement of these tools in your world. Maybe there's a subset of the population that is skilled at crafting magical medical instruments. Or maybe this is something that the actual medical practitioners need to do for themselves as part of maintaining their practice. In the end, the practices of healers, their tools, and their status shapes your society at a very deep level. They not only cure the sick, but often hold a unique space where spirituality, science, and societal norms interact. And to explore that concept, let's take a look at some fantasy examples of healing and fantasy worlds. First, let's talk about Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time. He presents a nuanced system of magical healing. Healing in this universe is an ability wielded by the Aes Sedai, the women who can channel the One Power. The Aes Sedai are divided into 7 ajas, or groups, each with their own focus or speciality. And there are 2 specifically that impact healing. The Green Aja, or known as the Battle Aja, are warriors, and they are often found on the front lines of conflict. Their healing techniques mostly focus on immediate and practical, rapid stabilization of patients and getting them back on their feet, which is the kind of trauma care that you want on the front lines of battle. This form of healing is obviously invaluable in the heat of battle, but it's not without cost. It often leaves the patient feeling drained and exhausted, as though they have undergone a physical ordeal. So, not fantastic to just continuously lift your troops up over and over. The Yellow Aja, on the other hand, are dedicated healers. They have perfected their healing abilities to an art form, being able to mend severe injuries and cure illnesses thought incurable. Their approach is more holistic and complete, often dealing with the root cause of an ailment. However, this form of healing can be very time-consuming and requires a deeper understanding of the human body and of the One Power. This variety within the healing practice not only adds depth to the magical system of Wheel of Time, but also allows for rich character development and plot progression. It highlights the fact that healing isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but rather a complex and intricate practice that requires skill, knowledge, and deep understanding. The world of Westeros, as described by George R.R. Martin in A Song of Ice and Fire, presents a starkly different approach to healing. Healing in his universe is mostly grounded in practical medical knowledge, employing a combination of science, natural remedies, and a little bit of superstition, based heavily on the healing practices of our world and our historical things that we've just been speaking about in this video. Maesters play a crucial role as the primary healers in the medieval-inspired society. They're trained at the Citadel in Old Town, and they dedicate their lives to the pursuit of knowledge, including the science of healing. They serve as healers, scholars, and advisors to the noble houses of Westeros, and their tools are not in any way magic, nor is it spells, but they use poultices, herbs, and potions, and even apply surgery. Maesters follow an evidence-based approach, studying the anatomy of the human body and understanding the causes of disease insofar as they can, and they formulate treatments based on that understanding. Their skills are symbolized by the silver link in their chain of office, which they wear around their neck. Each maester, the disciplines you forge links, that then the more links you have in your chain, the more disciplines you've mastered. So the silver link is the medical one. But the world of A Song of Ice and Fire isn't devoid of magical healing. There are instances of supernatural healing, such as the resurrection of Beric Dondarrion by Thoros of Myr, or the healing of Khal Drogo by the witch Miri Mazdur. But these instances are rare. They often carry significant consequences, and they often have a high price. And this provides a balanced perspective to the overall narrative of A Song of Ice and Fire. Martin's approach to healing provides realism and reflects the gritty, brutal realities of a world where magic is rare and unpredictable and often dangerous. It offers a very different look at the healing practices in a fantasy setting, and is probably one of the reasons why George has such a reputation for killing characters. If characters can die from a simple infection, a lot of them are going to die. In my world of the Sangwheel Chronicles, I chose to go with mages being able to heal themselves as long as they have the power to do so and are conscious through the internal magic of hobby. This allowed me to deal my characters terrible wounds, but they could recover from them. And it still maintains tension, since they can run out of power, or they could be knocked unconscious and be unable to heal themselves. For non-mage characters, I also created a magic that flows from the divine power of the threesome religion, name very much intentional, and that can cure pretty much anything. But it comes at a much higher cost, and you need a priest of the right-hand god, preferably with a priestess of the goddess and a priest of the left-hand god, to eat the divine desire afterwards, since using this kind of power, which is the power of the god of creation, the right-hand god, evokes, let's call it extreme horniness in his priest. And if you enjoyed that exploration of healers, healing, and their impact on society, hit the thumbs up button, and let's discuss some practical tips for your fantasy world. 1. Understand the level of technology and magic in your world. The medical practices of your world should reflect the level of technology and magic available. If your world is technologically advanced or possesses high magic, healing could be instantaneous and miraculous. On the other hand, low-tech, low-magic worlds might rely on herbs, potions, and rudimentary surgeries, and characters should really struggle with wounds. Infection should be common. 2. Incorporate cultural and spiritual beliefs. Healing is often intertwined with a society's cultural and spiritual beliefs. The role of faith healers, shamans, priests, or other religious figures can be significant. Spiritual practices could play a role in the healing process, and certain ailments could even be seen as spiritual or magical in nature. 3. Create diversity in your healing methods between your cultures. In our world, you have everything from the Druidic healing cultures to the traditional Chinese medicine to the Indian Ayurveda practices to the practices employed in South America to the practices that are used in sub-Saharan Africa. And your fantasy world should also have this variety of healing methods. Don't just pick one and say all cultures have this. That's not realistic. Different cultures will have different practices for their healing. 4. Consider the social status and training of healers. Are they respected professionals? Are they feared as witches? Are they revered as spiritual leaders or something else entirely? How are healers trained in your world? And how do they gain and prove their skill? And 5, don't forget the consequences. Whether it's magic-based or not, healing should have consequences. Instantaneous healing could drain a healer's energy, causing pain to the patient, or even shorten the lifespan of the patient or the healer. Traditional healing methods might have side effects or may not always be effective. This helps to maintain balance and tension in your story. If perfect healing is available every time, you reduce the tension levels in your story dramatically. Remember, the purpose of incorporating medical practices into your world building is to enrich your narrative, to add depth to your characters, and to create a believable, immersive experience for your readers. Every decision you make about the medical practices of your world should serve that purpose. And those are my thoughts on medical practices in fantasy worlds. If you want to say thanks for this video, super thanks is enabled, and remember to check out my books, links down below. If you enjoyed this video, check out my video on healthcare in fantasy worlds, where I delve into magical practices in more detail than I did here. And I will see you soon for another video.